Welcome to the first new video of 2026. So why not start off with a good one? Well, it is subjective if any of these videos are ever actually good or not, but today we'll be walking up Connecticut Avenue. Of course, the famous street of battles over whether it should have bike lanes or whatnot. Because, okay, so let's let so I don't think it'll be a resolution to make better videos or more coherent videos. Because no, the charm in my view is the rambling and bouncing around. But there is a lot we could talk about today. I've read 3 books over the holidays. Been very Soviet / Russo / Eastern Europe Slavophile. And fun fact, this is one of the pandas from the little art project from back in the day, apparently. But so we can talk about plans for 2026, one of which does involve the impetus for walking down Connecticut Avenue, or walking up Connecticut Avenue. If I'm really that content deprived, I can always do the inverse, walk the other way. Maybe it's actually not a bad walk. It kind of does show the good and the bad of DMV or DC urbanism. We have parts of it that are nice, but there's actually stuff to do. But that's mixed use. Then you have big blocks of just apartment buildings. So it wasn't that sense. This is, presumably, right, it can only get better. Whereas DC slowly learns the ways of the benefits of mixed use. So if anything, I am documenting a dying present that will be replaced by a better future. And of course, this DJI camera is so OP that it'll make it look nice. So we can talk about 2026. That's the name of with that involves moving apartments. I could only tolerate getting woken up at 4 or 5 a.m. 270 more times, it turns out. I literally today got woken up at 4:30 by one of my flatmates. So like, I do have masochistic tendencies, but at a certain point it does become too much. And then it does occur to me that Montgomery County in general is kind of boring. And certainly my crappy neck of the woods in Rockville, where it's literally only a single family housing, and there's a literal high school bus stop. I assume it's all grades, but I leave the house too early, so I only see the high schoolers. So and again, as some people get into like just overall feelings, or of course the stuff I complain about, it's impetus to try to minimize future regret. And if the cost for potentially doing that is doubling my rent, so be it. As well as, again, like my sleep sanity can only handle so much more. So we can talk about that. But you've also had the 3 books I've read. And since I do like being a pseudo-intellectual, because at the end of the day, that's all my vanity has, given my lack of success in in the other areas that matter. So the first book is Collapse, The Fall of the Soviet Union by Zubak, which is a good read. You can tell he is anti-communist. You can tell, or as he says himself. But at the very least, it does give a much more detailed view of why the USSR, I think collapsed is the fair word, given that that's what Gorbachev and Yeltsin and those Lithuanian nationalists did. Of course, the irony of it is it was not a popular revolt, and by the time the USSR was officially dissolved, Russia already banned the Communist Party. So, yeah. I've talked about it before. I've actually read the book. And again, the same way that, watching a film, the medium of the delivery itself conveys the message. The same applies here. Where the medium of reading a book conveys something. In the 1812 Napoleon's Fatal March on Moscow, right? This book starting out mundane, talking about the political setup and mustering all of the troops, right? That's necessary, where it works well, because it then highlights how quickly it went wrong once the retreat began. And the same goes for Collapse, where the mundane economic reforms and Gorbachev pushing for the Union Treaty, it is boring, or it's not a page turner. It's not a page turner at all, in the slightest. But then that makes the coup, when it happens, so much more interesting, because the coup does happen. It comes off super mundane. You see Gorbachev barreling towards disaster, and you wonder why no one is going to stop him from literally collapsing the USSR. Right, like the road he was taking was obvious, but so it does happen then, but it happens then, right? So that works pretty well. But yeah, so that was one book, Collapse. Made a Substack post about it, linked in the link tree. Probably need to finish it at some point. Same way I need to finish my Buenos Aires blog post at some point. But, what can you do? The other book was a book about the Russian Civil War. Again, by Anthony Beaver. Which, again, you can tell he's an anti-communist. And his focus is on the white Russian forces. Which I think is a disservice, because I think it's never explained fully how the Red Army got to a point of superiority, But, and so, frankly, the biggest takeaway from the Russian Civil War is that it actually was a world war, right? Because you already had, of course, you had the Entente intervention in the Russian Civil War. Which is wild if you think about it, because literally in Arkhangelsk, in northern Russia, you had the British were literally full out fighting the Red Army. Like, literally, genuinely fighting the Red Army. You have apparently it turns out that the Latvians were effectively the backbone of the Red Army. Certainly at the start. You have all the Baltics, you have Poland. Of course, you had Germany's involvement and withdrawal from Eastern Europe post World War I. Of course, you have the good old Ukrainian nationalists. You have Cossacks, Russians. You have Indians. Apparently Chinese individuals were heavily involved, given Chinese People were in Russia for labor during the war. You had, of course, Japan, France, U.S. Of course, the famous Czech division straddled throughout Siberia. So it's literally a world war. And then, of course, you had the Ottomans fighting in the Caucasus still, which led to a weird thing where British and Armenian and Red Army soldiers were fighting against the Ottomans in Baku, Azerbaijan. So it's literally, again, like Russia's a huge place that touches the Pacific and the Baltic and the Black Sea. So it's not surprising that it could be a world war. I think the book makes it clear that it is, and it was. So that's something I never pursued. It was just like, of course I knew about like the interventions, but I didn't realize they were as active as they were. But the Brits were literally fighting in the Red Army in the Karelian Isthmus. You know, of course you have the usual bits about nationalist movements in Ukraine and the Baltics and Poland. That's not surprising for anything involving Eastern Europe, of course. Actual fighting, again, just, yeah, it really does. Well, I wasn't the same way collapse vindicates the Communist Party of China. Like, if you read Collapse, and then you know anything cursory about what the Communist Party of China says about historical nihilism and avoiding it or anything like that, and you read Collapse, and it becomes so blatantly obvious. And again, Collapse came out relatively recently, so the CPC was talking about historical nihilism way before Collapse came out. And Collapse just wholly vindicates the idea. Because holy shit, dude. Collapse shows what happens when people don't believe in a system and won't, yeah, like at the end of the day, an ideological system is only as good as if someone's willing to kill for it, right? And like it's a horribly American brain analogy, but terribly American brain. But on January 6th, that Secret Service guy had no hesitation to kill that woman. You know, right? You can imagine a parallel scenario where the perception of Congress is truly corrupt and negative, and they let the protesters in. Right? The security forces collaborated. So, turns out that politics do matter. Ideological conviction does matter. And everything, right? Like any good history book, it just shows how random stuff is. Like how close Leo Tolstoy was to getting captured and obviously executed by white forces. Apparently, back in the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was so of course the coup happens, but the coup is disorganized, ultimately the coup is not disorganized. But again, this goes against popular convention, the conception. But the coup members, they were very worried about perception. They did not want to kill. They expressly did not want to kill anybody, have any violence, and they were definitely committed to complying with the Soviet Constitution. Again, right, all those things are not what the average American would think happened, but those are the facts, clearly corroborate that, given the lack of violence that did occur. So of course you have that setting, and so they didn't move to arrest Yeltsin, which was a horrible mistake because they allowed him to keep on yapping and be a symbol of Russian nationalism. And again, right, the complete irony of the Soviet Union is that, again, right, the way people use Russia and Soviet Union interchangeably is amusing, because the reason the USSR fell was not because of any protests or high-minded ideals, but because of Russian nationalism, where Russians were tired of subsidizing the Muslim Central Asian republics or the Baltics In the same way it fell because of Ukrainian nationalism and Baltic nationalism, or Polish nationalism with solidarity. Right? That is why the Soviet Union fell. Not because of US military pressure, because it turns out that the Soviet military industrial complex was actually quite efficient, and it was not an overwhelming percent of Russian GDP, of Soviet GDP, right? So it ultimately fell because of nationalism, and nobody in the Soviet apparatus being willing to actually stand up for the system or kill anybody. Which again is a great irony, because that's not the perception. But anyway, so back on to Yeltsin. So Yeltsin was holed up in the Russian parliament building known as the White House, because it's white. And so eventually, the coup members, they were prepared to go through with it, to capture him. And of course, think about security forces. That, of course, you have the actual military, but you also have KGB, you have Oman riot police, and whatnot, right? And so apparently, in an unrelated, because to enforce a curfew, there was an armored personnel carrier driving around Moscow, and a bunch of Afghan war veterans attacked it with Molotov cocktails and tried to cover the viewports, which caused a scuffle that led to 3 people getting killed. And so the defense minister, realizing that it was only the actual armed forces out on the streets, with no one else out there, lost his nerve, and withdrew the military from clearing the path that the KGB units would have needed to get to the White House. And that's how Yeltsin, so I guess incredible how history can turn. And right, and you think about, like, why were there Afghan war veterans in the first place? Well, because of Andropov, or not Andropov, but a long list of miscalculations and mistakes. Right, we read a book about the Soviet-Afghan War, talked about in a previous video. So it is very random. The other takeaway you get from collapse, you can apply this to poker. If you have any conviction as to why you need to re-raise in poker, is that ultimately, if you do, of course there's selection bias, because if you do things, those things could work out, and the people who do things cause events, and the people who don't do things don't cause events, and therefore don't get written about. So there is some selection bias. But if you read Collapse, and it's the contrast between Gorbachev, who literally does nothing. He ends his meetings without having any specifics, so nobody knows what they should be doing, and everybody's confused. And he differs on implementing economic reforms or crushing the moderates and liberals. Like, he differs on everything. And you contrast it with Gorbachev, who literally is, again, like, Zubak includes, you can tell that Zubak is favorable towards Yeltsin. Like, he's not slamming the guy to the way you could with hindsight bias. But again, the hindsight bias is incredibly damning. But he includes enough details to be like Yeltsin trying to flirt with Reagan or Bush's wife, one of them, at some state visit. So you get the sense that he establishes Gorbachev as this intellectual guy who's, Yeltsin is much more of the earth guy. But the of the earth guy, he's just running around doing stuff. Like, he literally, again, he just shows that right? When the communists were the ones who were scared of violating the Constitution and doing anything illegal, and Yeltsin literally confiscates all Soviet property, institutions, and military assets on Russian Federation territory. That is expressly an illegal act, but he does it and he gets away with it. So it just shows that, or on the night the KGB arrest was going to happen, like he didn't panic, he stayed and, over a sense of destiny or whatever. Like, it shows that, like, you can just do things. And if you do things, like, I think it's just like poker, right? Like, you cause something that the other person has to react to. And so you create confusion, you create, I don't know, to use some, like, Soviet operational art term, or you create confusion, and then, again, the same way in poker, if you raise, you have two ways to win: for making the other guy fold, or having the better cards. But if you don't raise, the only way you can win is having the better cards. So it's like, do you want 1 out, or do you want 2? Right. So that is collapse. Russian Civil War. Anything else? The violence of it comes through incredibly well. Like, it also comes like the same way, right? Like Lenin, like singular vision, true force. Like, it also comes up like, to me it comes off obvious as to why the Democrats will never accomplish anything, because the Democratic coalition is too big. And any successful political movement has been narrowly focused, right? Women's suffrage, narrowly focused. Any successful revolution, narrow focus that purges, right? Pretty much a lesson is, you can't have a bunch of pansy liberals in your coalition, or else you'll never amount to anything. And the obvious thing about the Democratic Party is a significant chunk of it are pansy liberals. So it is a great observed lesson. Nobody else wrong? Okay, back to political coalitions. Like, it does become obvious as to why the white Russian forces couldn't win the Civil War, because ultimately their coalition was way too broad, whereas the Bolsheviks were narrowly focused, expressly narrowly focused, right? Like the white Russians. So you pretty much have a weird mashup of Russian socialists who the Bolsheviks kicked out. Again, there's a lesson in coalition building and what works. You have Russian army monarchists. You got Cossacks. You had some nationalist ethnic folks, right? And so conceptually, right, like, if they're like, right, like the Russian monarchists, the Russian military officers who are favorable to monarchism and the Russian Empire, right, are not going to be aligned with the nationalist forces, especially when the Bolsheviks were expressly offering, we're certainly speaking much more about national independence, right? That is, again, lest we forget, that is why the Soviet Union had Soviet Socialist ex-Soviet Socialist Republic, right? Kazakhstan, Armenia, blah blah blah, right? That is why Ukraine exists as an independent state today. It all comes back to Vladimirovich Lenin, Tovarish Lenin, right? Lest we forget. And before you tear down another Lenin statue, Ukraine, lest you forget. So Civil War, anything else? No, yeah, it just comes out like, yeah, it's just, I was saying like the assassination attempts on Lenin, or having to put down the, I don't know, it's simultaneous. Like you read one of the, like you see one of his paintings of revolutionaries seizing the Winter Palace in Petrograd, and like you are felt again the same way like the French Revolution was an incredible thing that was true. Like, and you read something like, you see one of his paintings, like that great painting of the soldier in the White Palace with his rifle slouched down, and he's just looking up at all the Romanov excess. You're like, and then I believe this is the right side of history. But again, the book, like it can cause squeamishness, but it's not overly detailed in the gore, but just like you constantly read about civilians or prisoners getting shot and the other side doing the other. Not that it becomes tedious, but like it does show how brutal and unfair it was. Whatever question it does ask, it's like, surely at a certain point you run out of civilians to keep on brutalizing on from the snip snap. But evidently not. And the other book I'm halfway through is on the eastern/central fronts in World War I, which of course is, World War I doesn't really matter until the doughboys get involved, right? So, but it's only halfway through, but that's come out like I think it's a well constructed book, but it doesn't do as good a job of just, like he says that in 9 months, the Austro-Hungarian army like literally shrinks by 1 million men, and the Russian military by a similar number. And like he says the number, and he does do a good job of incorporating letters. Because again, right, the cool thing is all these aristocratic military bros, they write diaries and stuff. So you actually, the same way like the Napoleonic era, right? Like all the aristocratic bros write. So you've got great primary sources. But it just becomes obvious that, but he states the number of troops, of casualties that there are. And then he bypasses it. Like how insane it is that 1 million, like that is an incredible number, right? Like, yeah, so I suppose when you are trying to fit in the Italian front and the Balkans and the full Eastern Front, you're naturally gonna lose out on some details. Like, he's not even including the Caucasus, right? It's really the Ottomans in Russia. So I do suppose I would need to read a more narrowly focused book. But I think also, like, you kind of need all the context. All the context matters, right? Like, you need to have the Italian front and the Balkans and Russia and the Russian front, because that's the only way to contextualize why Austria-Hungary acted the way it did, right? Like the book, actually, from like a pure writing perspective, it has a great line where the Austro-Hungarians, they finally succeed in knocking Serbia, taking over Serbia proper, with the assistance of Germany and Bulgaria. But then as well, and then the French land in Greece. It's like, yeah, the multi-front war, which is hampered and limited the Austro-Hungarian army, right? Because again, right, the Austro-Hungarians have to fight in Galicia, in Poland, right? Two-front war, and the Italians get involved, and then they conclude that if the Italians get through the mountains, they have a clear shot at Vienna, which is only 200 miles away, right? So you kind of, and of course, also, like, the book also talks a lot about, not in detail, but what is happening on the Western Front. Like, it talks about Verdun, it talks about the first Battle of Ypres, you know. So, yeah, it's the same way, like, I don't know, it's just like you read enough, and then it also, over the holidays, went to just a bunch of Smithsonian museums. All of them were pretty cool. The African Art Museum was disappointing, because except for the Egypt stuff, like the Egypt stuff, you know, millennia old, extremely cool, right? Like things that are 3,000 years old, incredibly cool. But then everything else in the African exhibit, like you look at everything and it's, well, some of the Yemen, well, no, that was in the Asia Museum. So literally everything in the African Art Museum is like 19th century, 18th century. You know, it's like, I don't know, that's kind of, like, surely there's more, you know. So I didn't find that impressive. And then, like, the actual craftsmanship, or, I don't know, like, sure, the Benin statues are cool, but if those are made in the 19th century, and you compare that to things that happened a millennia ago, it's like, eh. But it is nice that they're free, because ultimately, there's only so much you can do at a museum. So it is nice that they're free ultimately. That helps. They'll justify the stuff. So those are the books. Substack posts, you know. So let's talk about 2026. Let's talk about hopes and dreams, right? What does David on January 4th yearn for in 26? Yeah, a couple things popped into my head. Probably shouldn't say. Well, dear audience / future me, you know, dear future me, you know very well some of the, you know very well some of the things that popped in my head. But I don't know, and of course the main thing is, of course, you can't. Some things just require being lucky, just being in, just optimizing the opportunity, increasing the odds of it happening. So I think similarly, advertising is a big thing, and it kind of correlates to moving apartments. I made a nice little spreadsheet to get a baseline of prices and options for next winter. You get a nice little 1 month free type of deal, type shit, you know. Like that'll be kind of cool, eh? You got a little $3,200 or a $1,600 tax-free benefit, low key, right? Not bad, eh? Whereas the big thing is, right, like do the math, right? Like I would like just living down the red line, because I do, again, right, like these videos are, right, I go into DC, Of course, I go into DC in the evenings or forever events, which I don't film, of course. And it's like, I go into DC a good amount. You know, it does take time. Like, it takes time to walk. Again, dude, on the camera, it looks very dark. It does not look that bright. But yet, when I pan the camera, it looks very bright and charming. Incredible stuff. DJI, of course, now banned from the US. Incredible. But like, the really short of it is, there's no apartments at Tenley Town. Most apartments are around Van Ness. You don't really have a lot. Like, there's nothing around Cleveland Park, or there's like a couple Woodley Park, and then as you see in this walk, right, like, there's pockets of mixed use, but it's very fleeting mixed use, so it's not overwhelming. Even things to do. So I kind of conclude that, you know, Van Ness will probably be the place. But I just think about how much time I would save, right? Like, I just looked on a subway this morning, right? Like, the subway, 6:04. I got to Woodley, or I got to Van Ness. Like, literally 20 minutes later, 6:24, and it's like, dude, I would save at a minimum 20 minutes. My work commute would be marginally faster. And then, like, my walk would presumably be shorter. A couple minutes. You know, so it's like, so I'd say I'd save 25 minutes on a single direction. You know, it's like from like Van Ness to DuPont or Metro Center or into DC proper. That's like 15 minutes. It's a very quick jaunt, right? So the short of it is, I would save so much time. It'd be hugely beneficial for being more active socially. So I don't know, like, just that, like genuinely, like, so I would say 50 minutes both ways, let's say. And that's just one time in DC. I go into DC like 2 times on Saturday and 2 times on Sunday. So I would literally save 2 hours. You know, or an hour and a half, let's say. So I literally save an hour and a half. That's like, dude, an hour and a half, that is big time, you know? Life is finite, right? So that's something that became materially obvious and is very, very attractive. And it's like there's literally nothing interesting or redeemable about the specific 5-block radius in Rockville where I live. Literally. Right, and like the stuff in Rockville that you'd want to do is the town center. And that's very accessible from the metro. So I wouldn't be giving anything up in that regard. But like, oh my gosh. It's like, a better life is possible. But I'm not the guy that sees it. It's like it's somewhat a risque joke. But the joke is, there is generational wealth for the taking every day. You just have to be retarded enough to go for it. It's like, you look at meme coins or Palantir or biotech investing, and all you can say is take a deep breath and say, That guy's honest. He is onto something. You know. As a funny aside, it's also like I reached a point where you see a cute girl and you, I guess, so I've gone, like, the evolution has gone from you see a cute girl and get riled up to you see a cute girl and just take a sigh to you see a cute girl and you just feel emasculated. It's like, wow, we are really, I don't know if we are de-evolving or evolving, but no, I mean, emasculating is probably nice. Well, it's not nice, but it's a thing. So, what can you do? To get on the record, you know, because again, I'm a vain pseudo-intellectual. Just drop some nice vocabulary, right? Atavistic, right? I have not devolved to atavistic tendencies, clearly, because no caveman is feeling emasculated when he sees a cute girl. Well, maybe. But I suppose that type of caveman wouldn't have succeeded, and therefore his genes would not be in the human pool. So I do suppose I am showing negative selection. Someone commented to me that a coworker commented to me that, like, man, that's a lot of old people. I see ambulances a lot. It is. Well, we have an ambulance here. I've kind of noticed it more. I remember I was walking down Connecticut, because it's actually, again, like, it's not an interesting walk, but it's not a bad walk. So I was walking down Connecticut, and again, like, it is closer, if I'm ever short on time. It's not a bad one. So I was walking down Connecticut, and one day, like, I genuinely did notice a lot of elderly. Like, elderly guy walking his dog. Elderly woman with her friend walking to a coffee shop. In the coffee shop, there were elderly people. It's like, holy shit. This either means I could really time when I decide to actually upgrade and take advantage of a huge housing stock boom. You know, it's like, I don't know. I just found out, I was like, and I didn't see that right. So it's kind of like the same way, like you're talking to a friend. This, out of all the DC yard signs I find charming, this one is. It's like, come on, bro. It's been a while. In retrospect, it was so obvious that, like, the vibes are off. Frankly, so I have a couple Kalshi features bets on that Gavin Newsom will not be the Democratic nominee. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've just come to the conclusion that American politics is super dumb. Because American politics, or at the end of the day, American politics are not real. Like people like politics at the end of the day, it's real, and that there's consequences to things. There's consequences to policies, but maybe it's the Bill of Rights or something. But in the U.S., like, that's really not the case, right? So it feels abstract, and that's why so much time is spent differing on fringe issues that are frankly more idpol, right? Identity politics, than anything actually substantive. Right, so frankly, American politics devolves, activizes into the vibes of politics, you know? And the vibes of politics dictates that the good-looking guy wins. The same way there's never been a non-Christian president, or I guess there has been a single president, but that was, okay, it's not the most robust sample size, but if you think about how JFK just mogged Nixon in that debate, it's like, I kind of see where this is going. And the same thing with Gavin Newsom, it's like, again, like, not to be, you know, he's a good-looking guy, right? Maybe a bit Patrick Bateman-esque, but that's to his advantage, frankly. And it's fine to have the hard right horseshoe theory, right? It's not horseshoe theory, because it's not an actual ideological spectrum. It's just a binary. But the ideological right bending around to favor Gavin Newsom over JD Vance. It's a beautiful world we live in, gents. Beautiful. But like the reason, like the vibes, the aesthetics, the symbolism, the imagery, right, is on Newsom's side. So all of that is to say, I have started to get worried about this Newsom bet. Of course, the other thing though is that essentially favorites do not do well, right? Because you kind of get attacked. Everybody attacks you, right? It's kind of why Biden had so many issues in the 2020 cycle, right? Because everybody latched onto him, latched against him. So, but again, the vibes are good with Gavin Newsom, you know? Josh Shapiro is gonna, come on, put Gavin Newsom against Josh Shapiro. Mogged. Put Pritzker. Now, I will say, Pritzker's got a little gambler in him. If Pritzker leans into that, honestly, I'd be a fan of a nice little, if you think about like who's reminiscent of like early 1900s political machines in the big city, Pritzker kind of got that phenotype if you think about it long enough, if you squint. So if anything, so I haven't said anything I want to do in 2026. 2026, you know, I will be in. Well, I assume the Caribbean will. I assume the airspace will be cleared up soon enough from the Venezuela violation of international law. That is okay. Again, the manufacturer's consent is. It's a shame. Again, it's horrible that Chomsky is an Epstein associate. But the nice thing is, I can always fall back to Michael Parenti. So therefore, I have my new guy, I'll say it. And so, I guess Chomsky is famous for manufacturing consent, so. But I assume the airspace will be clear in 2 weeks. So, you know, Chile. After that, nothing planned. You know, got a restockpile PCO. And of course, the summer, got the World Cup. Labor Day, September, do something. I'm thinking Kazakhstan, you know, this reading about Soviet Union and the Civil War has me feeling very Soviet sphere pill. So Kazakhstan's the best I can do.